Welcome all to the New York Botanical Gardens Science, Conservation and Humanities webinar, supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. We are very happy that you are joining us online from across the United States and worldwide for our webinar, this time entitled Alley Creek Wetlands, the Floristic Quality Assessment. I am Vanessa Sellers, Director of the New York Botanical Gardens Humanities Institute, and with me are my colleagues, Charles Zimmerman, Collections and Outreach Administrator for the Gardens William and Linda Steer Herbarium, and Danielle Atta, Director of the Conservation Outreach. We are delighted and honored today to welcome speaker John Versey, an important citizen scientist with the New York City Eco-Flora projects, who will be introduced further by Danielle Atta in a minute. First, now back to Charles for some technical details about today's webinar.
Thank you, Vanessa. After today's presentations, we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. At any time during the talk, you may type your questions into the Q&A module, which is accessible via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you're experiencing any technical issues or if you have difficulty hearing, please use the chat feature to send a private message to me or the panelists, or send me an email. My address is going to be in the chat menu in just a moment. To enable English language captioning, click the closed captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window, then click show subtitles. Spanish language captions are also available through an external link, which is provided in the chat. As a reminder, this presentation will be recorded, archived, and shared online in the NYBG Humanities Institute Lecture Library. Now please welcome Danielle Atta, Director of Conservation Outreach at NYBG, who will introduce today's speaker.
Good morning. I'm delighted and honored to welcome today's speaker, John Versey, citizen scientist with the New York City Eco-Flora. Before we start, I would like to thank Vanessa and Charles for their hard work and dedication in making the Science, Conservation, and Humanities seminars a place where science, art, history, and a shared love for plants is accessible to all. I also want to thank my colleague, Dr. Brian Boom, for leading the Eco-Flora project from idea to proposal to national prominence, recognized and funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services National Leadership Grant. The project seeks to engage ordinary New Yorkers, naturalists, and professional scientists to catalog the spontaneous flora of New York City and help conserve native plants and the many other organisms that depend on them. I think the success of the program today is due largely to a commitment to the principle of attraction over persuasion. We believe that meaningfully engaging the entire community with fun and rewarding activities can overcome the often insurmountable obstacles faced by so many flora projects. As many of you know, Brian is transitioning to emeritus status and has handed the reins of the Eco-Flora over to me. Brian's administrative skills, perpetual optimism, and good humor are an inspiration for me, and I thank him for his contribution so far, and I'm grateful he will continue to work with all of us to document and conserve the flora of New York City. In the fall of 2018, I had the pleasure of speaking at the Alley Pond Environmental Center to describe the Eco-Flora project in detail and encourage community participation. One person was particularly eager to see me after the talk. That was John Versey. John told me about his engineering skills and his background in horticulture. Now, almost 3 years later, I'm thrilled to introduce John and hear how he has used the tools and resources of the Eco-Flora and combined them with his unique analytic skills to quantitatively assess the flora of Alley Creek. John has conducted field surveys, floristic field surveys in Central California and the Cape Floristic region of South Africa. He holds an Associate of Science degree in horticulture from Farmingdale State College and is an advocate for the use of native plants in garden design for the benefit of biodiversity. John brings a data-driven sensibility and approach to floristics that stems from his long career as an electronics engineer, during which time he developed a quality metric to guide the procurement and reuse of silicon intellectual property. Now let's welcome our speaker for today, John Versey.
Thank you, Daniel. Welcome, everyone. Glad that you could be with us today. Let me begin by saying that I am just one of many citizen scientists associated with the New York City Eco-Flora project administered by the New York Botanical Garden, which catalogs the naturally occurring plants in the 5 boroughs of New York City. When I was first introduced to the Eco-Flora project, I was struck by the wealth of information in its iNaturalist plant database, and I could see the potential for applications for that data. And so that is how I came to develop a floristic quality assessment of Alley Creek as one of those applications. Now, I'm also a member of the Alley Creek EcoQuest Club, a program of the Alley Pond Environmental Center. Members of that club have been exploring nature in this Alley Creek area for many years. And so while there are several good candidates for floristic sites for a floristic quality assessment in New York City, it was natural for me to do one on my own home turf. So in today's presentation, I'll talk about the historical and geographical background of Alley Creek, the goals of this project. I'll talk about what a floristic quality assessment is, its purpose, importance, and structure. I'll talk about the tools that I use and the methods that I developed. And I'll talk about the project results and conclusions that I draw from the project and the data. History and background. This map shows the location of Alley Creek in relation to Long Island Sound and to the 5 boroughs of New York City, of which it is a part. This map, zooming in closer, shows that Alley Creek area, to which I am pointing, is a part of the greater Alley Pond Park. It is bordered on the west by the Cross Island Parkway and the residential neighborhood of Bayside, on the east by the residential neighborhoods of Little Neck and Douglaston, on the south by the Long Island Expressway, or I-495, and on the north by Northern Boulevard, or Route 25A, and the Little Neck Bay. The Alley Creek estuary area comprises some 134 acres. Centuries ago, the Mactinnacock Indians and early colonists used Alley Creek as a base for shell fishing in Little Neck Bay. The creek was navigable. And by the 1860s, when the first railroad bridge was built across the northern end of Alley Creek, it was built as a drawbridge or a swing bridge because the creek was still navigable. Now, the 1860s coincides with the midpoint of the Victorian era. And during the Victorian era, there was a Victorian craze for exotic plants. So plant explorers were sent far and wide to the far ends of the earth to bring back exotic plant material. And nurseries brought those plants into cultivation. Now, it didn't take long for those plants to escape cultivation. Plants like autumn olive, oriental bittersweet, Japanese honeysuckle, in other words, plants that are on today's most wanted list for invasive species to be removed. In 1929, New York City acquired the land that would become Alley Pond Park. And in 1939, Robert Moses built the Cross Island Parkway down through the western flank of the Alley Creek estuary. In 1957, the Long Island Expressway was being constructed, making its way ever east, and by 1957, it had reached the Alley Creek area. Between the 1930s and the 1960s, oh, I must say also that at that point in time of the construction of the Long Island Expressway, there was a pond at the intersection between the Cross Island Parkway and the Long Island Expressway called Alley Pond, the namesake of Alley Pond Park, but it was filled in and obliterated. Now, between the 1930s and 1960s, the sanitation department used the Alley Creek area for dumping. Wetlands at that time were considered swamps that needed to be filled in to stop the spread of disease and to be put to better use. It wasn't until the 1970s when environmental awareness became to the forefront and legislation was passed to protect wetlands. Citizen activism prevented undue development on the northern end of Alley Creek's northern boulevard, and the Alley Pond Environmental Center was founded as an educational resource. Beginning in the 2000s, Alley Pond was restored. Water quality improvement projects were done in the Alley Creek estuary. Debris was removed, as well as invasive plants, and native plants were planted. So, I wanted to see, after 20 years of restoration, where things stood in Alley Creek. So, the goals of this project are first to demonstrate how iNaturalist online platform can be used as a vehicle for data collection and analysis for floristic quality assessment. To my knowledge, this is the first time that iNaturalist has been used to do an FQA. Secondly, to provide the New York City Parks Department, in particular its Natural Resources Group, with a floristic quality assessment of the current health of plant life within the Alley Creek wetland. To my knowledge, this is the first FQA done in Alley Pond Park. And thirdly, to provide a metric and assessment tool for natural resource managers to use. For example, to track and assess the effectiveness of the Alley Creek Watershed Management and Restoration Plan of 2015. FQA is an acronym for Floristic Quality Assessment. In this section, I'll talk about its purpose, importance, and structure. An FQA is a frequently used method to assess the health of native plant communities by providing an objective metric which allows for measurable results. To be able to make effective restoration management decisions, you first have to be able to measure what is there. FQA was developed because assessments done before the advent of FQA did not provide for measurable results and were subjective. Now, in this presentation, I'll be talking quite a bit about native plants and non-native plants. So at this point in time, I think it would be good to give you my working definition of what a native plant is. A native plant is a species. A native plant species is one that has resided in a given area for a very long time and plays an ecological role in the food web within its ecosystem. By a given area, I'm talking about ecoregions, not political boundaries like the United States of America or New York State. Ecoregions are areas where ecosystems are similar. So New York State, for example, has 9 main ecoregions. Alley Creek wetlands are in the southern end of ecoregion 59, called the Northeastern Coastal Zone. And by a long time for a native plant to be native, I mean evolutionary time, not hundreds of years. So if we go back 11,000 years ago, when the first glaciers receded from this area and neighboring plants moved in, we still need to go back in many cases millions of years, which is the time needed for plants to co-evolve with specific specialist insects who use the plant as a host. 90% of insects are specialists, 10% are generalists. So specialist insects only associated with one or two or just a few plant species. Native plants play an ecological role in the food web. Their population is kept in balance by insects. Now, alien plants are not eaten by insects. There is no predator. They grow and spread unchecked, and they outcompete native plants. If native plants disappear, so do the insects that feed on them, and then so do the birds that feed on the insects, and so forth throughout the food web. That is why native plants are so important to biodiversity, and why restoration efforts and FQA assessments to guide restoration efforts are so important. Now, not all native plants are created equal. The first component of a floristic quality assessment is the coefficient of conservatism, or COC value. COC values are assigned to to plant species by plant scientists based on the species' fidelity to an ecological zone, or its ecological tolerance to disturbance. So non-native plants are assigned a COC value of 0. On the other end of the spectrum, native plants which have a high particular fidelity to a particular habitat, which have been there, for example, for centuries without being disturbed, receive a COC value of 9 or 10. In between the two extremes, COC values are assigned based upon a plant's fidelity to that zone and its stability to a native community within that zone. So I'm showing 3 pictures here of native plants and their COC values. By the way, all the photos in this presentation were taken at Alley Creek Wetlands. Now, floristic quality assessments were developed decades ago and have been used throughout the United States. FQI, the Floristic Quality Index, is its measurable metric. There have been several equations to calculate FQI that have been developed over the years, beginning with the total FQI and ending with the adjusted FQI. The adjusted FQI was developed to address limitations in the other 2 FQI equations. So an adjusted FQI index is structured so that sites with a higher proportion of native species relative to total species score higher. An adjusted FQI value has a range of 0 to 100. In other words, 0 would be representative of an area overrun by invasive species that are non-native. 100 would correspond to native species found in a theoretical pre-colonial native landscape. The benefits of the adjusted FQI are that they have an easily understandable range of 0 to 100, so you can see from the resultant FQI value how close you are to those 2 extremes. It's independent of assessment area size, so that allows for a comparison of multiple assessment zones. In this method, I'll talk about the tools that I use and the methods that I developed. iNaturalist is the first tool that I use. iNaturalist is an online platform that I use in this project to make and record observations of plant life, create assessment areas, and extract data for the FQA. We've all seen how crowdsourcing is being used in the sciences. Well, iNaturalist allows the power of crowdsourcing to be applied to plant ecology. iNaturalist is not only a tool, it's an online community that allows naturalists to connect and share their observations of nature. Users, as citizen scientists, can upload photos, and iNaturalist's image recognition software assists in the identification. These identifications become part of an ever-growing database. Identifications become research grade when other naturalists collaborate and corroborate their findings. Now, you can access iNaturalist through their website or by using their smartphone app. Pictures that are taken by smartphone contain GPS location and timestamp metadata that adds value to the observation. So I used the iNaturalist feature, create a new place, to create my assessment zones. My assessment zones are defined as ecological communities, basically intertidal zone, marsh zone, lowland zone, and upland zone, which taken together form the overall Alley Creek composite zone. Now, the traditional way of creating an assessment zone is to go into the field, hammer stakes into the ground to define a rectilinear boundary like a box or a rectangle for an assessment, and go into that area and record observations on paper. With iNaturalist, you can create virtual assessment zones of any size and any shape, and you can create them on any computer. And with your iNaturalist app on your iPhone, you can see your location on a map and as you move through space. And then you can take that assessment area and overlay it onto the map. So you can see yourself move into the assessment zone. You can see what observations are already there. You can make observations with the app, record observations with the app. So this is an iNaturalist of the Alley Creek composite zone in dark green. So the boundaries of the zone are shown to avoid areas of anthropogenic disturbance like roads and highways. The Alley Creek composite zone consists of marshes, moist woodland areas, meadows, and dry upland woods. The first subzone is the Alley Creek Intertidal Zone. It's a tidal estuary, shown on this iNaturalist map in dark green. It consists of the subtidal waterway, the creek itself, surrounded by intertidal mudflats. The mudflats are submerged at high tide and exposed at low tide. The second zone is the Alley Creek Marsh Zone, also part of the estuary. It consists of low salt marshes which flood daily, high salt marshes which flood seasonally, and freshwater marshes. Now, salt water from the north in Little Neck Bay and fresh water from streams further south combine and mix along the length of Alley Creek, forming brackish water. In the Alley Creek Marsh Zone, there are many salt-tolerant plants, such as Asclepias, the swamp milkweed, smooth cordgrass, which is being used in restoration work, and Phragmites australis, which is the dominant species, which is overwhelming and growing to encompass the entire estuary area. The Alley Creek lowland zone, again shown in dark green, is a mosaic of ecosystems. It can be considered a paleostrine zone, whereas the preceding zones were estuarine zones. So this mosaic of ecosystems contains meadows, streams, ponds, and moist woodlands. These are some examples of plants with their CLC values found in this area. Cattails, which spread rapidly as indicated by their low CLC value. Purple loosestrife, which is invasive. And black locust, which is here listed as a non-native plant. Now, I list black locust to harken back to what I said before about a native plant's location not being related to a political boundary, but an ecoregion boundary. Black locust is originally from the Ozark and Appalachian Mountains, and it has spread rapidly throughout the East Coast. But it is not native to New York State or New York City, and so it is given a COC value of 0. Now, there are many salt-tolerant plants also in this area, such as Rhus typhina, the staghorn sumac, Quercus rubra, red oak, and Elaeagnus umbellata, the autumn olive. The Alley Creek upland zone, shown here in dark green, is a mixed hardwood forest fragment with an extensive edge habitat, which is due to its long, narrow profile. Young hardwood saplings along the edge are vulnerable to climbing vines like oriental bittersweet, which suffocate them and interfere with forest succession. These are some of the plants found in the upland region. Tulip trees, which are very much found in the Alley Pond, eastern Queens area of New York City, very typical. American beech, which is found in abundance in the understory of this area, and Norway maple, which dominates the canopy of this area. Now, it's not surprising that Norway maple would be in such abundance because it borders on the residential neighborhood of Douglaston. And for many years, New York City planted Norway maples as street trees. So it was very easy for it to make its way from the neighborhood into the upland woodland area. Another word about Norway maple that harkens back to what I said earlier about plants needing evolutionary time to become native, not simply a couple of hundred years, is that the Norway maple was introduced by the well-known colonial botanists, the Bartrams of Philadelphia, in the 1750s. And in the 250 to 300 years since that time, the Norway maple has not changed one iota in the ecological role it plays, nor have insects associated themselves with it. So 300 years is just a blip in evolutionary time. Now, I used iNaturalist for data tracking. So prior to 2014, there was not much data available for this area on iNaturalist. But by 2019, there was much more. So looking at the distribution of research-grade observations, I could see that there was a need to increase coverage for the FQA. So in 2019, extensive field work was done, both individually with the Alley Creek EcoQuest team and with the contribution of many citizen scientists. Two examples of the kind of field work that can be done are the time meandering protocol, which targets a small area. A small team comes in and looks for every available species in that area until no more are found. It's like going through an area with a fine-tooth comb. Another way is the Ecoflora BioBlitz, where a small group of citizen scientists are called in to collect a lot of data, for example, one particular species, to collect a lot of data on that in a short period of time, an event. Now, the iNaturalist export feature allows one to parse observation data for extraction by a date range, by plant type, by observation grade, and by the boundaries of an assessment zone. This data can be exported into a standard CSV file format, which can be then further manipulated by a tool like Excel or Access. The second tool I used is also an online tool called the Universal Fqa Calculator. It accepts CSV format data extracted by iNaturalist and references it to a companion ecoregion database of plants and which it provides. The original database is from the NatureServe Northeast FQA Project Level 3 Ecoregion 59. It's a table of over 2,700 species, which includes scientific name, nativity status, and COC values. Now, I took this original database and I customized it to provide a richer data set that includes common names, plant duration, growth habit, wetness index, using information that I obtained from the New York Flora Atlas and the USDA Plants database. This is the resultant page of the Fqi calculation, FQA assessment done for Alley Creek composite, showing all three Fqi equations calculated, showing metrics that were calculated for species richness, species wetness, growth habit, duration metrics, and listing all the species in a tabular form with those metrics. Results. In this section, I'll talk about the Fqi results, the distribution results, and the conclusions that I drew from the results and the methodology. Fqi results. As you can see, I used the adjusted Fqi equation because of its benefits, and it's composed of a ratio of species richness multiplied by a mean COC value, which maps to individual plant species COCs. So you can see the result of the Fqi equations for the composite and for each of the subzones, ranging from 31 to 38. These values indicate low quality. So let's take a deeper dive into these results to see why the Fqi's are so low by examining the COC distribution. You can see by this chart that almost 45% of the plant species in Alley Creek composite are non-native. Another 20% fall in the category of native plants that are either themselves invasive or are not typical to this area. A mere 10% represent plants that, species that may have been there for centuries, that were never disturbed, and that may be very specific to that region, for example, endemic plants. So you can see by the low 10% that this is the remnant of what remains from what was originally there centuries ago. That leaves only 25% of the native plants falling in the category of a stable plant community. So my recommendation to resource managers when planting native plants for restoration projects is to choose native plants that help to build a stable native plant community, not just plants that spread easily to get quick results, and not plants that are specific and very vulnerable because of their specificity without first addressing the disturbance. In conclusion, Alley Creek wetlands have been shown to be a disturbed site. The Fqi metric shows the level of disturbance. I believe, to my knowledge, this is the first Fqi using iNaturalist. iNaturalist and the universal Fqa calculator and the synergy between them is shown to be effective tools for doing a floristic quality assessment. The adjusted Fqi equation is the preferred equation for comparing wetlands and analyzing results. The methodology is easily adoptable and repeatable. It can be used by restoration managers and citizen scientists alike. It allows, for example, restoration managers to view assessment areas needing management. It allows for GPS pinpointing of invasive species to be removed. And it allows for selecting native plants for restoration. Thank you very much. This concludes my talk. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
John, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Really excellent. We already have some questions coming in from the audience, so I'm happy to start sharing those out loud so you can give some perspective to folks. And just a reminder to everyone else, please enter any questions you have to the Q&A module at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you prefer to speak out loud, that's fine. Just click the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we'll call on you to unmute your microphone.
Okay, so Charles, I cannot see the chat window.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll share
the. Repeat the questions for me. I would appreciate it.
Of course. So actually, first in the Q&A, we have two questions that are on a similar topic. So I'll actually ask them together. Margaret asks, how does climate change affect the health of native plants and changes in local ecosystems? So that's talking about the health specifically, but then we have another question. How should climate change affect definitions of nativeness? So I don't know if you want to answer those together or separately.
Yes, I'll answer those together. Yes, of course, what we'll see as climate change warms the planet is that plants that are right now native to a particular area will migrate north, and other plants which are from a southern region will move in and populate what is today native plants. This means that COC values will have to be reevaluated, and nativity status of plants will have to be, in the long term, reevaluated. It also engages restoration managers in a more challenging aspect to how to do their restoration work.
Thank you. That's really helpful to understand better. Kathy asks, how would or does the quality or quantity of citizen science data on iNaturalist affect a floristic assessment? Would targeted bioblitzes be helpful?
Yes. So floristic quality assessments are not based upon the number of instances of a species in a particular area, simply about the presence or absence of that species. iNaturalist programs and ecoflora programs like BioBlitz allow one to look for specific species and to seek out species so that all species are accounted for in a given area.
Mm-hmm. And so I actually had this question, does it, so abundance data is not taken into account necessarily for calculating those indices?
There are two types of floristic quality assessments. One is an inventory assessment, which is what I've done in this case. And then there is another kind which includes coverage data. But when including coverage data, it involves an estimation. So an estimation introduces subjectivity. So the lion's share of floristic quality assessments done, based upon my survey of assessments done, is the inventory assessment methodology.
I'd just like to jump in on that last question, if I may.
Of course.
Regarding the quantity and quality of the data, that one of the real great strengths of the EcoFlora project and the iNaturalist tool is that it's an accumulation of many people's contributions, so that we have expertise in many different groups contributing to the quality of the data. So if there's a specialist in the sunflower family, they'll be able to look at the sunflowers or the Asteraceae family that was observed at Alley Creek or any other area, and the world's expert can weigh in on that particular observation. So we have a tremendous advantage in working this way, a distributed and collaborative way, that an individual project, an individual researcher would have a very difficult time engaging the world's expert on a particular group. So not saying that you can't get good quality data any other way, but because it's so distributed, that the quality really is very high in the...
Yes, and I would like to also add to that by saying that iNaturalist actually allows you to lower the bar as to people making, in terms of their expertise, for people making observations and identifications. It does this and still maintain quality results. It does this in three ways. One, it does that through its artificial intelligence software. So the more plants that are in the iNaturalist database, the better a suggestion that iNaturalist can make to the observer as to what that plant is. As the database grows larger, that suggestion becomes more and more accurate. The second point is what Daniel alluded to, is that you're not making your observation in isolation or identification in isolation. There is an army of citizen scientists, which include people with very much experience in the ecological sciences, in botany and horticulture, which are out there looking at your observation and identification. And if you've misidentified it, or if you've ignored what the iNaturalist suggestion, or if you just, or if that was wrong, they're out there to correct you, and they will. And remember, an observation does not become research grade until more than one person corroborates it.
That's great. And we have people at all levels of experience participating. If anyone here hasn't used iNaturalist before, highly recommend it. It's such a great way to get started and get interested and learn so much about plants. And there's no ceiling for how much you can learn there. I'll get back to some more of the questions because we have a lot of great questions coming in. Georgia asks, what time frame would be necessary to transform the Alley Creek wetlands to a higher adjusted FQI?
I'm not in the position to know how to answer that question.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to be done in terms of conservation work. It's hard to say exactly how long. I will skip ahead though, because it looks like there is actually a comment from someone with some familiarity of some of the conservation work that has been being done. So Thomas says, NYC Parks has been replanting extensively in the area over the last couple of years. I would expect the areas to become better known. Most are east of the creek. When does this information become reflected in iNaturalist? When is the next assessment? Has NYC Parks expressed interest already in using this information?
So this is the platform by which I am reaching out to New York's NYC Parks. Now, much of the replanting that has been done has been cordgrass north of what is my assessment zone. In other words, on the other side of Northern Boulevard at the mouth of Little Neck Bay. Planting has also been done, and that was planting of native grasses. Planting of native trees have been done in the area of my assessment. So this data of those plantings are part of this assessment.
Mm-hmm. And I guess iNaturalist is always being updated, right? As more citizen scientists are out in the field making observations.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in there real quick. I was visited the Alley Creek area recently and was very pleased to see that the cordgrass, the smooth cordgrass, is really taking hold, even in the southern part below Northern Boulevard. So that's the other really great advantage of the iNaturalist database and the EcoFlora data is that it's very easy to keep a real-time assessment. So there's a very low cost and effort barrier. And so you can adjust the time period of your assessment at any scale or temporal scale that you want. So I think John's presentation is a really terrific example of how you can use this data very efficiently to assess the ongoing, how the flora is doing pretty much in real time, because you could do another BioBlitz this year or next year, and you could rerun John's methodology, and I'm sure that you would get a different result. So very low barrier for actually doing real-time assessment, just a huge advantage.
And any of us can do this, right? Using the tools that are totally openly accessible, right?
Yes.
Well, I think John has a particular expertise and skill in using the data. He pioneered the way for us and perhaps can help us all, but everyone can participate and help collect the data, help advocate for native plants, and enjoy the beauty of Alley Creek and the native plants there.
Oh, we actually have a hand raise. Georgia is currently raising your hand. I'm gonna unmute you, Georgia, so you can speak out loud.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank John for the presentation. I'm very interested in using this method, not in a different habitat type, in a small urban park in downtown Manhattan. I think it's a really good way to show for folks to visualize the composition, the tree composition and shrub composition It's almost like a rapid environmental assessment. And I love the fact that it's very flexible and that you can easily do it multiple times. It's also low cost, low barriers to entry. I actively use iNaturalist, and it's a wonderful community. So thank you for sharing this approach with us.
Yes, thank you, Georgia. And the Floristic Quality Assessment is not just for wetlands, it's for any natural area.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a couple people thumbs upping the question, which means it's a popular one. Will there be a workshop for those who want to learn iNaturalist? Daniel, do we have anything upcoming?
Not on the calendar now, but if you email your interest to Charles, I'll be glad to put that together with our staff at NYBG. Of course, now it probably is going to be a virtual workshop for the time being, and we could certainly put that together. Great thing about iNaturalist is it's so easy to use that a lot of the use of it is pretty intuitive, but there are quite a few aspects that could benefit from workshops, so tips and tricks.
Yeah.
Communicating with
Yeah. For example, I would recommend when making an observation in iNaturalist that you take not only one photo. You take, for example, a tree. Take the bark picture. Take a picture of the leaf. If it's in bud, take a picture of the bud. If it's in flower, take a picture of the flower. You may have to come back several times as the seasons change to get all those photos, but it'll enhance the quality of your observations.
Those are great recommendations. I think we also might have a recording of our talks that were earlier this spring, talking about digital citizen science tools. You know, at the beginning of all this, where we're closed and having to be separated digitally. I think that is up on the NYBG's lecture library page. So I'll post a link as well if anyone needs that. There are some introductions to the iNaturalist project and how to get started if you moving forward. Kat asks, answering as a user of iNaturalist, if a workshop is not planned, you can go to iNaturalist on your laptop and view some good, easy videos on how to get started. As apps go, it's pretty user-friendly for quick data gathering and looking for suggestions. As you learn, you can get into all the extras. So thank you, Kathy. Bill says, were you able to observe any effects on native plants due to disease or pesticides that may be introduced into the area?
No, I have not.
All right. Let's see. Related to citizen science, how can we coordinate to inform maintenance and restoration work with NYC parks?
To my knowledge, NYC Parks coordinates that through their different divisions for doing restoration work. They also partner with independent organizations, I understand, to do that.
I see, it's great.
Another advantage of having this data in a publicly accessible database is that we all have access to this data, including the New York City Parks Department. So
yes,
the EcoFlora, we have monthly or quarterly meetings with the Parks Department, and we update them on interesting or important new discoveries that are made throughout the city or important issues. And so we all have this access to this data. and they're able to use the data in real time to inform their management decisions.
Right. Now, the Universal FQA website, all my assessments that I discussed today are there as public assessments. You only need to go to that website and register, and then you can view all the assessments.
Yeah, I think I noticed that last time I checked out the site as well. You can see all the assessments that are being done. Very cool. So someone asked, will the recording of this talk be available? Of course, it certainly will be. It'll be posted on the NYBG lecture library when it is finished, and we'll forward a link to everyone who's registered today, including, I think, some folks that are from the Parks Department. How does, oh, Nick, this is from Nick, John. How does iNaturalist take into account duplicate observations when determining if the data collected is research grade?
Well, duplicate observations would mean that one person misidentified the plant species and another person correctly identified it. Since an FQA only is looking at one particular instance, presence or absence of that species, whether it's given once, twice, or 10 times, that's immaterial. What I think you're alluding to is if somebody misinterprets a species as something that it is not, and that makes it into the iNaturalist as a research grade observation, well, at that point, it's passed through all the barriers that we put up to it. It's past the barrier of artificial intelligence identification, of the community correcting that estimation, and unfortunately, it's there in the database.
I see. We have a few more questions. We are running out of time, unfortunately, for the day. We always comes to this, no matter how much time we have, we don't have enough. But John, I want to thank you for your talk. I want to thank all of our audience members for being with her today. Thank you, Daniel, for your work on the EcoFlora project. And for John, thank you, Vanessa, for support, the Humanities Institute's support for our programs as always. If you enjoyed this webinar, please join our next program on September 11th with Carolyn Finney, entitled Black Faces, White Spaces, Christian Cooper, John Muir, and Reclaiming a Green World. I'm going to place the link for that into the chat for everyone who would like to attend. And until next time, please stay well, stay green, and take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.